Hello again, everyone. This is Randy, your sewing machine man. We're looking at a Kenmore 28. And they usually say 28 because it has 28 stitches or something like that. It has at least that, if not more. Built-in 4-step button holder. Nice little machine. The reason this one came in today is because, like almost every 385, this is a model 385 decimal, bunch of numbers behind it. Don't get caught up in the numbers behind the decimal. This is a 385 series Kenmore 28. Drop-in bobbin, 15 class, plastic. The reason it came in, like so many of them, 99 out of 100, the daggone reverse lever down underneath the mechanism. If it gets sitting for a long time without being used, the daggone thing, it has that lithium grease on there and turns into lithium glue and has to be taken apart, cleaned, and reassembled. Every single one. There's a million shortcuts and try this and try that, but it won't work. And this one, even if you've taken it apart, wiped everything off with a solvent and maybe even polished up the stud, the post that it pivots on with maybe some memory cloth or something like that, it'll still be a chore because you got to run it and cycle it to get it to reverse. And I'll usually do that about 100 times before I get to the point where I get it back to the customer and they'll sit down and it'll actually cycle in reverse. Now, if this thing sits for a long time, after I get it back to the customer, 6 months, they sit in the closet. I tell them, when you get it out, the first thing you do, whether you have fabric in it, whether you have thread in it, no matter what, cycle it. You'll hear that click. Hear that click? That is down underneath. That is that lever cycling. There's a little nylon eccentric gear on a shaft, so it's nylon on metal, and it has to have that oil to get it to slide back and forth, and sometimes it'll just hang up. So I'll make sure I do it until it's just unbelievable how many times I'll do this to make sure that it's going to behave, and then I know when someone sits down and starts going, it's going to cycle in reverse. Now, if you have a 158 series Kenmore, you don't have this problem because they have a front load 15 class. This is a 15 class drop-in. Not my favorite setup, but I don't hate it either. It's like cars, you know, you can get a rear wheel drive. My truck is rear wheel drive. I prefer that. I pull a trailer every now and then. My wife has a RAV4. It's a front wheel drive, but it's a Toyota. So, you know, I don't worry about it. It's well done. It's a good front wheel drive. I won't have one. She loves it. I'll drive her. Sometimes I'll even rent a front wheel drive going on a trip. I'm not going to be crazy and say I'm not going to be caught dead in one because that would be goofy. This is a good little machine. Compared to what you're going to buy nowadays, this is an excellent machine. If you can get one of these Kenmore 28s, be prepared to service it. When I tell people to service it, they're curious. What do I oil? And I always say everything that pivots, rotates, hinges, or slides. Pivots, rotates, hinges, or slides. And I'll give you an idea what that's all about. And I have a lot of the screws out of this one. I don't have it put it back together completely for the customer. I left it basically disassembled so I can show you what's going on when I say pivot, hinge, rotate, slide. All right, so I got it propped up down here. So I'll take this off. I'll bring this over and I'll lift this up. It just comes right off. It's got underneath, take the top off. It's got the screws hidden under the handle on both sides. A screw and a screw. There in the top. Let me pull this back a little bit so you can see what I'm talking about. They hide the screws underneath the handle. You're like, well, how do I get the top off? Lift the handle up, screw in the left, screw in the right. And over on the left-hand side, you got these little fasteners over here that holds onto this little side over here. That holds that down. You got to loosen these. They don't take them all the way out. Loosen them just so it'll clear that. Then you lift the top off of the bobbin winder. Let me snip the thread and give you an idea what's going on with the hinge, slide, pivot, and rotate. And I'll take the thread out. And we'll take the bobbin case out. And while I got the bobbin case out, I'll show you what a good bobbin case. These drop-in bobbin cases, they're making them thinner and thinner. The ones Singer made, some of them you can just about read through them. They're so thin, about the width of a newspaper. Of course, I'm exaggerating, but that's the way it is. It's got the drop-in bobbin, which means it has the metal base underneath, the metal base, which means it has the magnet underneath that holds it in place. That little ring there is a magnet. In the center is a oiling wick. And you notice that this rotates around it. Okay, there's your rotates around there. I oil the daylights out of that, make sure that oiling wick soaks all the oil down to that main bearing. Let's get closer here so you can see what the heck I'm talking about, because you'll say in the comments, I couldn't see it. And you're right. Let me be a little more courteous to you here and get that a little closer. See down there in the center, there's an oiling wick right here in the center. Let me get my emphasis pointer, known as my tweezies, and right there in the center, there is a wick there. Don't pull that out. A lot of times folks will grab that and pull it out thinking it's lint. It belongs there. That's your oiling wick. It oils that main bearing. This is a magnet underneath that holds your bobbin case in place. I'll pull that up. That is what holds your bobbin case in place. The bottom of your bobbin case, of course, is metal. This is a magnet. It keeps it in place. So it's gravity plus that, plus your settings on the side. This is a thread gap setting. Let me get this in here right. The thread gap setting on the right. This is your thread gap. Where the thread slides through in two places is your thread gap. Every machine has a thread gap. That has to be in there so it moves that much. Thread gap there at the red and the arrows pointing at each other. Thread gap here. The thread has to slide every stitch. It comes through there, and this thing rotates back and forth, back and forth. So the thread gap has to be right. I get these in, these are bent all to daylights because something else is going wrong and people think the problem's here or here. If this goes like this, leave this screw alone and this screw alone. Right here, that screw. See, it's got the paint on it. That means, usually when it has paint on it means don't mess with it. It's preset, locked in. Paint on it, paint, paint, paint. Leave these screws alone. That's what the paint tells you, all right? There's your thread gap there. For some reason it's off, it's almost always going to be this one, or if this one doesn't come up here to bump in the notch, right there. If it doesn't bump in the notch, then sometimes you'll do that, but it's rare. These rarely get out of thread gap. It happens, but what happens more often than not, I'm trying to do this with the camera, making me look like I don't know what I'm doing. More often than not, what happens is these spin out. If somebody uses an oversized thread, they'll use 69 nylon or hand quilting or something crazy. This will spin out, the needle will nail it, and it's hard for the needle to compromise this one because this is very thick. This is a good thick bobbin case. Most of the new ones are paper thin, even here, wafer thin. You can always read through them, like I said. So this all has to be smooth. If it's not, get a file it off, get some emery cloth, get some crocus cloth, make sure everything's smooth. When I recondition these, there'll be rough edges around the outside. It causes the thread to hang. You always want to make sure this is smooth. I got this one nice and smooth. It's in great shape. Okay, so that's oiling something that rotates. Now, what pivots? What in the world pivots? Let's see if we can find something up here on the top that pivots. Pivots back and forth. Well, we're going to get that down there in reverse deal in a second. It's going to pivot. The reverse lever is going to pivot. I'll save that for that. Rotates, pivots, hinges. Anything up here. Look at these right here. See these connected together? See how they pivot, how they hinge. Put a drop of oil. Sometimes I'll see that little drop right there, a little hole. I'm sorry, a hole where that oil goes in. Get my mouth working. Right. Where am I at here? Right there. Back here. See that little hole? That's an oiling place right there. Oiling port. Put your oil there. Anytime something goes like this, give it a drop of oil. Rotates. Your main shafts rotate right through a bearing. Whenever you see it rotating through a bearing, right there. Drop of oil. The other side. Drop of oil. I mean, it's just what you see is what you get throughout. Over here on the side, I've got the side cover off so you can see over here where your belts are. You have a drive belt over here on the side. You have the motor belt over here on the side. You have an idler wheel, which is right here. An idler wheel, you want to oil that. That's metal with a nylon idler on it. You see, when you drive, it rotates around there. That thing, when it's dry, it'll squeal and talk to you like crazy. Motor inside the bearing, there's a little felt right there, right inside. You'll see the felt. Put a couple drops there, and on the other side from underneath. On the other side of this, there's another shaft that goes through the housing. A drop on either side, okay? because it's going through and rotating. So let's go down here, hinges, rotate. Let's see a pivot. Down here we got a pivot. This is the main culprit, and I have a video on how to take this apart and put it all back together. This always hangs up. See right now how it's working like a charm. There's a lithium grease that goes on right there. It's white lithium grease, turns to a glue. So you have to take this apart. I have the video shows you how to take this off, how to take the E-clip off, how to take the washer off, how to take the spring off, and how to put it all back together. Don't lose the E-clip. That's what you need to make sure you don't do. And this has oiling wicks. There's an oiling wick here. You can see that. That is an oiling wick right there. And you got another oiling wick hanging out. Where's it at? I know I saw it. Where's it at? Right there. There it is, another oiling wick. Oil those. Of course, anything that goes through a housing, like over here, goes through a housing. Let's get this right there. See, that's coming out of the housing. It's the other side where I showed you on the motor belt side. Put a drop there. So you can see what I'm talking about. The shaft comes right out of there and rotates. This you oil because it pivots. See how that pivots? Back and forth. That's a pivot. Put a drop there. Down here on the ends where it rotates. Anything that hinges, rotates, pivots, or slides, give it a drop of oil. Now we'll get this thing all back together. Probably taking about another 10 minutes to get it all back together, and this thing will work like the day they made it. It's a great little machine. I'm told this is made by Janome. Janome makes good stuff. Of course, it's got a nylon gear down underneath. They rarely break. It's just not something that happens if people will just be smart and not try to sew on stuff too heavy. And sew on your shirts. Sew on your shirts, your jammies, your blouses, your pillowcases, and your quilting. This make you a great machine. A lot of features, durable, lasts a long time. But if you get a chance to buy one of these, you know, somebody had one of these for a reasonable price, if you can grab it, be prepared to do all that stuff I told you to make it good as new, or take it someplace and get it professionally serviced. But good little machine. Kenmore 28. It's the 385 series. Drop in Bobbin 6 or 15 class. Thanks.